Hey everybody, Mark Fetter, co-founder of Everyday, and looking forward to having you check out this interview I just had with Judi Robinovitz from Score at the Top. Judy's a longtime education expert and college admissions expert. Some of the things we talk about were how do colleges actually evaluate the candidate? So if you can think like they do, it's going to make your application much stronger. Also, why students shouldn't worry too much just about the GPA. There's some context to that. And perhaps most importantly, most valuable and actionable from this conversation is what can students do to increase their chances of getting into their dream college? Enjoy the interview. All right. Well, Judi, thank you so much for joining me today. Look forward to chatting with you about the college admissions process. I think the main question we want to cover today is a loaded one, which is if I'm a student applying, high school student applying to college, what can I do to increase my chances of getting into college?
It's really a great question, and I wish there were a simple, straightforward answer. And perhaps there is in the sense of just always do your best at everything you can, but that's much too general. I think it's important that students and parents understand initially how colleges make decisions, and that to recognize that there's no formula. They're not just putting some numbers into a rubric. Perhaps some very, very large state universities do things like that. But for the most part, to recognize that, let's say, in order of the top few, I would say, academic record, but we have to understand how colleges are looking at it. SAT and ACT score, despite all the protestations of colleges that it's not as important as you think, and the fact that about 2/3 of colleges are now test optional, many of them just on a temporary basis because of COVID-19, and I'll go into a little bit about that. I'm going to say extracurricular, let me say engagement or commitment as opposed to just extracurricular activities. And I think then finally, presentation on your application in terms of your essays. So looking at those as sort of the top four, what is it that kids can do to improve their chances? And it starts with knowing this as early as 8th or 9th grade, so that you can understand that it is not your GPA that colleges are looking at. They are doing a more granular evaluation of your transcript and are looking for the sequence of courses that you've taken, academic rigor, how challenging your curriculum has been, especially in comparison to your peers, because you're compared in context, or you're evaluated in context against your peers. So in fact, what many students don't recognize is that on the school report that a college counselor is required to fill out for virtually every college that you apply to through Common App, she is asked to evaluate you both academically and extracurricularly, and then in terms of your character and overall. And basically, it's almost like a Likert scale, where the highest rating is, Judi is one of the few students who reaches the highest levels I've seen throughout my whole career, down to she's in the top 5%, the top 10%. She's, above average, etc. So that what you're really looking for is that your academic rating from your guidance counselor, in terms of how do you compare to others, shows that you are taking the most rigorous courses you can possibly take. But I have to add that needs to be tempered with taking the most rigorous courses you can comfortably take and enjoy, so that killing yourself to get into an uber elite university that may admit fewer than 10% of its students should not be what it's all about. It should be about, hopefully, eventually the love of learning and challenging yourself in areas that really interest you. It's become unfortunate, I think, that there is so much emphasis on the number of AP or IB AP courses, or getting involved with the IB curriculum, which, by the way, both fabulous curricula, but students do tend to sometimes, I'd say, overdo it, but it is important that you push yourself. So depending upon the level of school you're looking at, making sure that, for instance, if you're applying for any STEM program, a competitive STEM program, computer science, engineering, math, biology, basically that you've had your sciences all the way through the AP level, in preferably AP Bio, AP Chem, AP Physics, and especially engineering. You may want to have more than 1 year of AP Physics, assuming your school offers it. That you, basically you've taken calculus at least AB, if not BC, or the higher level maths in an IB curriculum. So kids need to recognize that colleges are not just calculating a GPA, but as I said, on a more granular level, looking at the actual courses and especially the senior curriculum, that students may sometimes feel, well, I've already met, I already have my 4 years of math and my 3 years of science, so I don't need to take that as a senior. Well, you're wrong. And even if you say, I will never look at another math or science course again, which of course is not going to happen in college, you'll most likely have some of them, that you really need to have a full curriculum, especially as a senior, with at least 5 core academic subjects. So the best way to ensure success in college admission and success once you're on a college campus is by challenging yourself as much as you comfortably can and working to be the best that you can academically in terms of your grades.
Got it.
Okay. SAT, ACT score, even in the face of test optional, is still important because test optional is not test blind. If you send an SAT score to a test optional college, it will still consider it, and that may even be a tipping point for you. In fact, last night I listened to a wonderful webinar that was moderated by Jeff Salingo, a journalist with I think a Chronicle of Higher Ed, and it was interesting because Worcester Polytech's admission dean was part of the panel, and they have been test optional, I want to say, for about 14 years. I may be wrong about that, but a lot of years. It's not just because of COVID. And he stressed how much the number of students who are non-submitters has increased. So he basically is saying fewer and fewer kids are now submitting SAT and ACT scores. So Jeff asked an incredible question, which I was furiously typing away at the same time that Jeff beat me to it, which is, okay, so what % of your kids are now submitting scores? I was going to guess, okay, maybe it's down to 50 or 60%. It's down to 80%. So the majority of kids are still submitting. University of Chicago, which went test optional several years ago, if you do the research, if you go on Common Data Set, you're going to find out, well, because many kids submit, I shouldn't say many, but a lot of kids submit both SAT and ACT, it showed more than 100% of the kids are submitting scores. Well, there's overlap, but here's Chicago, the most prestigious university that before COVID-19 went test optional, yet the overwhelming majority of kids are submitting. And US News and World Report does ding a college if they have fewer than 75% of their enrolled students reporting scores. So reading even between the lines of what the colleges are saying about test optional, and maybe because I have a vested interest because I'm also in the test prep business, and perhaps it's also being in the test prep business, I study these things more carefully. I definitely recognize that a test score can make a difference, especially to a very competitive major in, say, STEM or prestigious double degree programs like BSMD or direct entry nursing programs. But even when you're not looking, at that level, I do think that, your score, while it alone is not going to predict your success in college, together with your academic record is a wonderful predictor of how successful you will be in college. And having a score that is at least in the range of where the college has been doing acceptances in the past year is important, and preferably being at the high end, of that range. So I think that means that, I don't think it necessarily means that you have to prep for the SAT or ACT, but I think kids at a young age, as early as perhaps 9th grade, need to be aware of standardized testing. It will be a part of their life as they plan for med school, for law school, for business school, to become practicing attorneys, practicing physicians. You're going to have to take these tests, and you need to know what's on them and understand, what you can do just on your own as a student to improve your reading comprehension, your math, your logical math reasoning skills, to learn how to recognize particular patterns in questions to be able to attack them, more easily. And you don't necessarily have to spend tons of money, formally prepping. There's a lot you can do, on your own in terms of, reading, being a reader. Go beyond what you have to read in an English class, even if it's just magazines. Stimulate, a love of reading. Kids who say, oh my God, I hate the reading comprehension section on the SAT, generally do pretty poorly. But kids who enjoy reading will generally do significantly better on that. So if it means even lying to yourself, to tell yourself how much you love reading, you'll eventually believe it. I know that with my background in math, when I was in high school, I had almost, I'd say roughly a 200-point difference between, my math and my reading. And it was because I hated reading. I was the queen of Cliff Notes. As an adult, things have changed, and all the times that I've taken an SAT, my goal was to not just get the 800 in math, but to get it in, reading, writing. And so I've become, since, a voracious reader. I love to read, but initially I had to lie to myself and say, "But Judi, you love reading," and so I think that kids who learn to love reading will naturally get better scores on an SAT or ACT in the verbal sections. And kids who go for extra help from their math teachers, who want to know, like, well, why does the quadratic formula work? When I can't factor something, and, who dig deeper are, I think, going to wind up getting higher scores. But I do think that as students get closer and closer to, say, midway through that junior year or the beginning of senior year, if they haven't yet achieved scores that are in the range that they believe they need, then it is time to do something on a more formal basis. And honestly, nothing beats practicing with real tests. College Board and ACT both make real tests, available. Some can even be downloaded for free. So that is a great way for kids to practice, but they do need to recognize that that score can be a tipping factor, whether a college is test optional or not.
Mm-hmm.
But perhaps my favorite thing to talk, you have a question, go ahead.
Well, I do, but you go first.
Okay. My favorite thing perhaps to talk about is extracurricular commitment, because I think that there is a tremendous misunderstanding out there. Many parents will say to me, oh, Judi, doesn't Susie have to be well-rounded? And the answer is no. Susie needs to be well-rounded academically and be strong in, left brain, right brain types of things. But Susie needs to be angled, not well-rounded when it comes to her extracurriculars. She needs to have a passion for a couple of things, and be completely committed to it. Long-term commitment, not a few hours here and a few hours there. And, if she, let's say, gets on her high school yearbook and she's, as a freshman or sophomore and really enjoying it, seeking roles of increasing responsibility as she moves on in her years in school, learning to be a good leader, not just a great, let's say, writer and editor, but a good leader and especially a good collaborator. Colleges love kids who take initiative, who start new things, who can even involve their friends to show that they have a collaborative spirit and can work together collaboratively, and that they can actually have an impact on outcomes, on other people, be able to influence others and perhaps leave a legacy so that once they've graduated, this activity will, continue. And it doesn't matter what the activity is, and are some better than others? Perhaps, a really strong student who's also a debater or is active in, say, Mu Alpha Theta, may have a nice advantage because there could be some national titles in there. Being, a strong athlete who will either be, let's say, recruited or is showing, this perseverance, this fortitude, the ability to keep something up for several years, using summers productively, whether you're working as a bag boy at your local Publix, food chain, if you don't have a Publix near you, or whether you've got some high level apprenticeship, and you're programming, or perhaps you're just teaching yourself coding. But it's super important because colleges want to know that when you're there, you're going to engage, you're going to contribute to the campus community, you're going to be an influencer, on campus. So it's important to pick a couple of things. And the earlier you start getting involved with something, the longer term, you have to really develop a passion and dig deeply into it. So whether it's community service or, a school club or something that you do as part of your cultural or religious heritage, it's just being involved, because colleges need kids to be involved in a wide range of activities. And I do think it is the way that you present yourself on your application that really matters. They're not going to know if I just write that I'm a cheerleader. They're gonna say, oh, big deal. Okay, so she's a cheerleader. And in fact, I recently did, for my niece, worked with her on her resume, who, oh, Aunt Judy, all I am is a cheerleader. Well, when we, came up with the places that the competition she had been in, the collaborative spirit, her choreography, her helping to make travel arrangements for the cheerleading team, her keeping, school spirit really high, and achieving unity, at the student body level. These are all things that can be put into a resume to show that a cheerleader is much more than just, a pretty face out there. And I say that as a former cheerleader too. The last one is the essay, but I think you had a question that you wanted to ask me.
Well, yeah, I've got quite a few follow-up questions, because a lot of stuff, good insight there to unpack. I think the first one to start with is, I think there's a sort of disconnect between how basically the advice you're giving, a few things you mentioned were colleges will evaluate you in comparison to other students, right? They don't just look at the GPA in a vacuum. And also the great advice to not drive yourself crazy about just trying to count AP and say, I took all 38 AP classes, but do it within reason of what you can comfortably handle, right? So I think that's great advice. And so it's a hard way to articulate it, but how do you sort of reconcile, hey, follow that advice with the fact that there are still people out there that fall into the rat race? And so if you are compared to other people, like, how do you sort of juxtapose, hey, just do what's best for you, but also, hey, by the way, you're being compared to these other people that are driving themselves crazy. And so, yeah, like, it's not a really well articulated question, but I think you get it.
No, I do get it, because there are a number of families that I've worked with, over the years, whose either parents or children are, prestige conscious and are basically playing the rank game. For example, if you, the way our ranking works at public high schools here in South Florida is that the ranking is weighted. So it's based on not just your unweighted GPA, but the extra points you're going to get from taking, AP, IB. We also have ACE, part of Cambridge, or dual enrollment courses. So many kids will say, well, I've, taken as much as I can in my 7 periods a day at my high school, and I'm actually going to take extra courses through FLVS, which is an online public high school here in Florida that does offer AP courses. They even come to our school, SCORE academies, and take AP courses for credit, because we have the same accreditation as the public schools do. And so there are plenty of kids out there like that. And I have to say that some of them are truly doing it for a love of learning. It's just that they're sponges. They just love learning more and more, and will take extra courses either during the school year or in the summer in order to advance their rank and look more competitive in the face of college admission. And then there are other kids who you can tell by their choices are looking for sort of the easy way out. Well, gee, as a junior, I've never had AP Human Geography. I'm going to add that now. And most people who've been in the field of education for a while understand that AP Human Geography is not the hardest AP course. It's a great way to get your feet wet and see if AP might be for you, because at least here in Florida, we give that, as a freshman course. Or we'll take dual enrollment courses that you tell from the selection that it's not out of the love, of learning. And by the way, I think colleges can tell that as well. So that if I'm taking let's say, dual enrollment nutrition course, and I'm not interested in health sciences, I'm not interested in becoming a nutritionist, but I'm doing it because it's an easy dual enrollment course that I can get an A in and really boost my rank with taking a few courses like that, as opposed to my taking a dual enrollment course in, let's say, differential equations, because I've already finished both years of calculus. There's a huge difference in that. So number one, colleges understand, I think, have insight and understand when kids are playing that rank game and don't reward it the way kids think they're going to be rewarded. And that they can, I'd say, if you throw in the recommendations, so that if it's really reflected by what a teacher has to say about a student being, giving examples of a student's intellectual curiosity, of a student not just participating in class and leading study groups, but coming in periodically to talk and to dig deeper. Then if that's a student who has taken lots of extra courses and it's corroborated by a teacher who in his anecdotal representation of the student shows this love of learning. Okay, so in that case, it's real. And this is a student who might truly belong on an elite college campus. But I think, again, like you just said, Mark, the students have to do what's comfortable for them. If, hey, listen, Judi, I can't take 4 AP courses next year. It's too much for me to handle. That's fine. We have to back off. But you do have to understand that ultimately making decisions like that will impact, let's say, the colleges that you are the best match for. Because it may be saying that you're not the type of student who can work well under intense academic pressure with lots of competition from your peers. And many kids can't work well under those conditions. And therefore, we're not going to look at necessarily a school that everybody's going to say, oh my God, she's so smart, she goes there. Ultimately, in the scheme of things, it doesn't matter. Most of my students have no idea where I went to college, but they respect the work that I do. But
yeah, and I think that's such a great point, that it's okay, right? It's like you shouldn't be trying to force yourself into insert name of elite institution, right? Harvard. It's like maybe Harvard's just not the right fit for you. And the last thing you want to do is get in and then realize that after the fact, right? And either fail out or just hate life there.
Yeah. And I have to say, I have that perspective a lot as a result of my own son, who's, I mean, he's out of college now, 20 years. But when Jason applied to college, and I have to say that I was his educational consultant, not for my daughter, because she felt she knew better than I did, but for my baby, for Jason, he only applied to 4 colleges. And because I knew that we had them structured correctly in terms of, 2 stretches, a target, and a safe. He did get into all 4 of them, and he actually chose his safe school. And I have to say that back then I was probably I was really more of an academic snob. And I said, like, why are you choosing your safe school when you got into much, more prestigious schools? And I would not use the term better, because I don't think that one is better than the other. And his answer was, put me in my place, and it was very simple. He said, Mom, it's quality of life. I want to be out west where I can ski. I love the outdoors. I don't want to come in the middle of the class. I want to come in closer to the top of the class. I want to have time for my academic life, for my social life, to just veg with friends. I know that this is what's going to make me happiest. And so that's what he did. He became an even stronger student. I have to say he's now a better skier than I am, although he's been a better skier for a long time. And it wasn't always that way. And it also got him into a really, very prestigious law school. At that point, he was ready for it. But he really made a great point that I don't want to be in a rat race in college. I want to enjoy my life. And prestige didn't mean anything to him back then.
Yeah.
And I have to say that today, some of his best friends are still from his college days. So he did go to the University of Denver.
Yeah. So that's, so you just said it, right? You just admitted that yourself back then you were a little bit more caught up in that rat race of.
No question about it. I was.
So what advice do you have for parents in particular? Because I had attended a webinar last week with Dr. Denise Pope from Stanford in her Challenge Success program, which I'm a huge fan of. And they had surveyed parents, and they said individually, like, what are your values? What do you care about? And most of the answers were my child's happiness, their well-being, the things you kind of expect.
Mhm.
The question is, what do you think society values? And it was the ranking game and all that. So it's
No
interesting.
question.
We individually make up society. So what advice do you have for a parent who personally is like, oh, I'm all about the happiness, I want my kid to be happy, but yet they also feel that societal pressure? What do you tell parents who are stuck in that limbo?
Tell them to open up a bottle of wine and veg. I mean, you know, we sometimes, you know, I talk about sometimes the fact that I see so many kids who come into my office who are anxious, depressed, who are, you know, on medication, who are continually worried about what the next person is thinking about. They're frequently on edge. And I just try to reinforce with parents that having a happy, healthy, well-adjusted kid is much more important than your being able to brag to say that, you know, my student is at Emory or Duke or Northwestern or Cornell. They could be just as happy at little plug for High Point University. I happen to be on the admissions advisory board, but that's an amazingly inspirational place for a more mid-range student. You know, let's say for a B student, and I hate to say, but B is sort of the new mid-range with, I mean, everybody's getting straight A's, you know, so it seems. And sometimes it is a matter of saying to parents, when you go on a college visit, and assuming that we do eventually return to in-person visits, you know, watch your child's body language and see, you know, if she appears to be sort of more comfortable in her own skin, more at ease, happier, you know, on particular, you know, campuses, especially after she learns more about, you know, the academics at that school and what life is really about. And even in my own practice, I will stress the social emotional side of college with the student every bit as much as the academic side. And we will talk about, without parents there, because I am their confidant, like, how much do you really want to party? How much do you need, you know, to party? How much of that is a part of your life? Or how intellectual do you want that environment to be? When you're going out on a Friday night, do you want to go out with your lab partner and talk about what you saw under the slides? Or do you want to do, you know, something else? Mm-hmm. So I try to make my families see all sides of college life, but some of them do still hold on to the prestige. What can I say?
Yeah. Hopefully, slowly but surely, they can change their mind, but to each their own, right?
Yeah.
There was one other question I wanted to follow up on, you know, back to this theme of the rat race and just trying, I guess, basically biting off more than you can chew. I think about the flip side of that, and a student who may not want to challenge themselves for fear of failure. Mm-hmm. I think one question that I've seen pop up on like Reddit and Quora and things like that are, does submitting a bad AP exam score hurt my chances of getting in? So if you can address that, as well as just kind of the higher level question, would be great.
Yeah. So my advice to my students in terms of submitting their AP scores, and I'll say the same thing for IB scores, I don't believe in submitting all of them. I don't believe in submitting, for instance, for AP, I tell my students not to submit their zeros and their ones and twos. And I have a lot of my really smart students fighting me on the threes. But I said, you know what, if you don't submit your 3, the college may think that you only had a 1 or a 2. So I would much rather submit a 3. If you're applying uber competitive, it might hurt you this tiny, tiny, tiny little bit, but I'd rather be open and honest. But I would yet not submit a 1 or 2 because I think that that could hurt me at any level institution, especially if I've earned an A or a B and my AP exam score. And I'm going to say this year may be an exception because AP exams were given, you know, in such a different environment. I'll tell the same thing to my students for their, you know, their IB scores, that report anything that is a passing score, even if you were hoping for a higher score. And although Common App does not have the, for whatever strange reason, does not have the opportunity to report ACE scores, AICE, it's part of Cambridge, and it's very big here in Florida. I have my kids put it into the additional information section of Common App, but only their passing scores. And I do think that if you have a string of 4s and 5s, I think that that could be a small boost or can support your grades, especially if you're coming from a high school that might not have much representation yet at some of the colleges to which you are applying. And then for the students who are really afraid that of failure, what we'll talk about is baby steps. Like for next year, perhaps take one or two of your classes and make them honors, or wait for the summer and try an AP course when you're only taking one course over the summer. Try it, or find out what your school's policy is in terms of how long do I have into the term before I can sort of drop back a level or drop out of a course, because many high schools will allow you like 2 or 3 weeks before you have to make a commitment to really be in a course. And if I see that a student has been like got an A in just regular English 1 and regular English 2, I'm going to really try hard to push that student into trying honors English as a junior, and if that works out, perhaps AP Lit as a senior. I'm also going to suggest to my students who are really afraid of too much challenge, and by the way, if they fight me too hard on it, if they're really afraid of the challenge, then they have to do what's best for them, and I can just make sure that their curriculum is balanced and that they at least have an English, math, science, social science, and either a world language or perhaps computer science, so that they have a well-balanced curriculum. But I also talk to kids about doing things like an academic jumpstart at the very end of the summer, spending 2 or 3 weeks, a few hours, perhaps 2 hours a day, maybe almost every day, with a tutor, get access to what textbook your school will be using next year. Let's do a jump start. Let's get you ahead of the game because you're afraid of AP Bio or whatever it may be. And you're now going to be a couple of weeks ahead of your class. You can scale back and still maybe keep a tutor once a week until you feel you don't need that extra support. And I think of it more as an academic coach. It's no different than, my husband is a single digit golfer, but he has a golf coach and he practices with him every week, no matter what. And his friends think he's crazy because he's like one of the best golfers in the group, but he still has somebody encouraging him, supporting him, tweaking things. So I think it's important that if you're going to take a chance on something that you think is a bit difficult for you, that you lay the foundation in advance, you get some support as you start the class. And once you feel that you've sort of got it on your own, you no longer need your academic coach. And I do think that's what good tutoring or academic coaching is all about. It's not giving you a crutch, but it's giving you the tools and the encouragement to be able to now fend for yourself and feel confident. But certainly having an academic coach by your side whose enthusiasm for learning and whose strategies and tips for study skills will really, pay off and help you become more successful is important. So I may be fortunate in the sense that I can offer my students, if they need it, an academic coach, an SAT, or support whoever it is that they have found. Because I think that we all need help in different things and get what you need.
Yeah, and I think you brought up I have two takeaways I think that are great from the story you just told, that you don't, whether you have an academic coach, tutor or not, are, the example you gave of your husband playing golf, is like he loves golf. So he's intrinsically motivated to continue to get better, even though he's the best one out of the group. So he's not getting the coach to say that he can beat his friends, because it sounds like he's already doing that. But to the student, find what you're passionate about, or explore, if you don't already know what you're passionate about, pick a couple things, go down that path. But like you said, dedicate yourself to it. And then, as well as the point about start a little early, like don't let these things pile up and then that adds to the pressure. Do a little bit every day, start early, and you'll be in a much better place.
Sure.
So I like those messages you gave. I know earlier you said you wanted to say something about essays, but then I brought us back. So I want to give you that opportunity to mention whatever you wanted to mention about essays.
So I think that your college application essays, your personal statement, your supplemental essays are definitely, a tipping point in an application. It is one of the things, in addition to your resume, that's truly your voice. It's not hardcore numbers. It's not data. It's who you are, as a person. And giving insight into your character, your values, the things that are important to you, things that don't show up in other parts of your application, can make a definite difference in terms of college admission. But I think what students often, number one, writing about yourself is the hardest thing going. That many students will say, I have nothing to write about. My life's been uninteresting. There have been no major obstacles. I know we have a list of at least 20 or 30 questions that, my essay experts go through with kids to stimulate their thinking. When I was on your website earlier today, and I saw advice from another educational consultant that you had interviewed, I thought that was really, a great idea. If you were going to have an accident tomorrow, but you knew in advance you were going to have it and you were going to lose all of your memory, but you could pick 10 memories, to keep, what would they be? I thought that was, great advice, because that can start a whole interactive dialogue about what emotionally is important, to a student, and be able to write about it. I also think that there can be a tremendous misunderstanding about the personal statement, in the sense that the writing that most kids are used to doing, regardless of whether they're at the very top of their class, or not, is that they've been doing the standard 5-paragraph essay with the thesis statement and a summary, and some body paragraphs, and that's all well and good if you're writing for, an English or a social science course. But your personal statement is more like a dialogue. It's a conversation. It's as if I'm right there talking to you, and I'm telling you something about who I am. So it is creative writing, at its best, not something that kids have a lot of experience with, and something that they sort of need to be talked through and understand how that writing style is very different than what they've been doing in class. And it really sort of, it lets the admission person really see who they are as a person, and what their sort of deepest and innermost thoughts are. Many years ago, I attended a presentation at Princeton by the then dean or director, Fred Hargadon, and it has stuck with me. This has to be, I'm going to guess and say 35 or 40 years ago. And I was only 3 at the time. But he was saying that, what does the admission essay do for us? It basically gives us the opportunity, if we could, to unzip the top of a student's head, open it up, and look inside to see what makes her tick. And that has just always stuck with me. And I think that, while I don't think you can salvage, bad grades or a sloppy application with a fabulous essay, I do think that by giving it really deep thought and going through multiple revisions, and perhaps by reading it aloud to yourself, maybe to some friends or parents, but not with red pens in their hands, can really help a student write a winning essay that can tip the scales, in her favor in terms of admission. But the opposite is also true, that a hastily rushed essay can doom an otherwise great application.
Yeah. Because, I mean, look, like you say, the competition is so steep, especially at a, highly selective school, that almost everyone is going to have the grades, the, test scores. So that really is your best opportunity to tell your own unique story. Right. And I love the point that it's not just about the narrative and trying to unearth those unique talking points, but the style that a high school student typically, like you said, it's that 5-paragraph, very structured academic type of paper that is what they're used to writing, but this is not that. And I just know from my own personal experience, if I'd be super embarrassed to look back at what I wrote in my applications, because I didn't get it. I didn't work with a consultant, and I think in hindsight, I was like, I thought it was how good is this person at writing, but that's not what it's about at all. So great point.
So I hope that, just focusing on those, 4 factors can give anyone, who might listen to this interview, or read a blog or whatever it is that you and I wind up doing with this, is going to gain enough insight to say, aha, have this epiphany that, so these are some of the things I can start to do now. A few things you can start as a senior in terms of how your resume really looks and how it pops, what you write in your essay, and certainly other things that you can start, middle school if you want, or the beginning of high school, in terms of the courses that you select, because one builds upon the next, and in terms of getting ready in whatever way you choose for the slimy and atrocious torture, otherwise known as the SAT or ACT.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This was a pleasure. I could continue this conversation for hours, but
yeah, I could too. So
out of
another
respect for your time, I will not do that. But yeah, anyone watching, I'm going to provide some more details in the comments below about Score at the Top, Score Academy. Those are two of Judy's companies. So if you're looking for advice in the college application process or academic tutoring and whatnot, definitely check them out. And if you liked the insight from this interview, please subscribe for more in the future.